time for you to rethink.
You know the word annihilate? It means reduce to nothing.
Perished means killed.
We know what perished means.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us for Rethinking Hell Live, where evangelical Christians discuss what the Bible says about hell and put conventional and controversial views to the test. Join the discussion in YouTube's live chat or email your feedback, questions, and episode suggestions to live@rethinkinghell.com. Rethinking Hell is on Facebook as well, and be sure to check us out on Patreon if you'd like to become a supporter of the show. See the description below for all links and details, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for future updates.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Rethinking Hell Live. My name is Chris Date, and if you are able to see and hear me well, then I'd appreciate a thumbs up or something in the chat just so I know that everything's hooked up and running smoothly. Thank you to Susan, otherwise known as SlamRN, in the chat. She does a great job of moderating, and I appreciate her help. And also thank you, the rest of you who are joining me live, and for those of you who are watching after the show has been archived into our channel. It's at this point in the show that I normally go through some introductory stuff, but I really have a lot of material to cover, and so I want to dive right in. I don't know how long this will take. It could take as little as an hour, could take as long as 2 hours. I'm not sure. I've got a lot of material. So I just want to dive in and start and get it out, just start going right away. So what I want to do, as many of you who have come here, it already looks like it's a greater audience, a larger audience than usual during our live show, and that may be because of sort of the teasing I've been doing on Facebook about how I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into Matthew 10:28 than I've ever done before, and presenting what I think is yet unpresented evidence in favor of a annihilationist reading of Matthew 10:28. And so some of you will already know this, but for those of you who don't know, this passage here, Matthew 10:28, which should be up on your screen right now, just to your, from your perspective, the right side of my head. It's to my left. This passage here, Matthew 10:28, features prominently in the intramural Christian debate over the nature and duration of hell, and for very obvious reasons. For those of you who don't already know this, the doctrine of eternal torment, stretching back as far back as when Christians appear to have first started believing in it in the latter half of the 2nd century with people like Tatian of Adiabene and Athenagoras of Athens. Those two, and Augustine a couple of hundred years later, and Aquinas and Calvin, all the way to the present day, the doctrine of eternal torment has always maintained that the resurrected unrighteous, the resurrected lost, the unsaved, whatever, upon being resurrected will be given immortal bodies that will live physically forever in hell. This has been explicit, it has been consistent, it has been repeated all through church history, again, stretching at least as far back as when we first start seeing the doctrine of eternal torment amongst Christian believers in the latter half of the 2nd century. Peter says, it's too bad we're not playing Chris Date Bingo because I'm likely to say everything I normally say in this one episode. Indeed, that may very well be true. But anyway, so that's the tradition, the doctrine of eternal torment. It's not merely about disembodied souls going and suffering forever somewhere in a disembodied afterlife. It's about resurrected immortals living physically forever in immortal, never consumed, never destroyed bodies. By contrast, this text, in this text, Jesus says something that at least on the surface of it, at first glance, appears to challenge that perspective. Because here Jesus says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." Hell translating Gehenna or Gehenna. So what we're going to do now, as I said, this is featured prominently in the debate for centuries. And I'm not presuming, I don't think I'm going to be saying anything substantially more or different than what annihilationists in the past have said, but I do intend today to do a deeper dive than maybe has typically been done. Could be wrong about that. I'm not any more a genius than the giants upon whose shoulders I stand, but that's the kind of deep dive I want to do today, because the defenders of the tradition. And by the way, just as a side note, I'm only periodically peeking down in the chat. Like I said, I've got a lot of material to cover, so if I don't see something you ask or say and don't respond or whatever, I apologize in advance. A lot of material to cover. So the reason why I want to do a deep dive into this text today is because the defenders of the tradition, defenders of the doctrine of eternal torment, will simply say, at most, that yes, on the surface of it, this kind of seems like it's teaching annihilationism, but it's consistent with, or at least compatible with, the doctrine of eternal torment as it's allegedly taught elsewhere in Scripture. And the way that they will do that is by typically either saying this only says that God can destroy both body and soul in hell, but not that he will, or they'll say that destroy means something like ruin or waste or something along those lines. And so they'll try to come up with some way of making this compatible with the doctrine of eternal torment that they think they see elsewhere in Scripture. And I think a deep dive into the evidence that we're going to be looking at today challenges even the claim that this is in any way compatible with the tradition. We'll see if I'm right about that when all is said and done. So that's the stage I'm trying to set, or I've tried to set, and I want to deep dive into this text now. But before I start getting into whether it supports before I get into whether or not it really does support our view, I want to answer a couple of preliminary questions first that often come up, beginning with what is ostensibly a very bizarre reading of this text on the part of no less than N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright is of the opinion, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe he's recanted this, maybe he still thinks this, but he seems to think that the him who can destroy both body and soul here is not in fact God, but is in fact Satan. And I want to start by at least taking a brief look at that view and offering a few reasons why I think that is an implausible, infeasible reading of the text, beginning with this ability to destroy. So here's the first reason I think that this is clearly God and not Satan, because this says the one who can destroy, or it's speaking of the one who can destroy. And if we look at James 4:12, we see James saying there is only one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and destroy. Able here is the same verb dunamai. Well, so actually I think in Matthew 10:28 it might be dunamis. Let me take a quick look. In Matthew 10:28, it's it's dunamai. So the verb dunamai means is able to, and the word destroy is the Greek verb apolumi, and those two same words are the ones used in James 4:12 to say that it's the one lawgiver and judge who is able dunamai to destroy, apolumi. Same two words, and in context, it's saying the one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. This is clearly not the judge and lawgiver here clearly is not Satan. So this seems pretty clearly to be God rather than Satan. Another reason why this clearly isn't Satan and is rather God is because we're nowhere ever told to fear Satan, but we are told to fear God. So, for example, the Greek, the Gentile proselytes, borderline converts to Judaism were called God-fearers, and that was a good thing to be, somebody who fears God. And in fact, Peter says, he instructs people right here, fear God, and it's the same verb, phobeo, meaning to fear. It's where we get the word phobia from. All right. So the second reason for saying this is clearly God rather than Satan is because we're never told to fear Satan, but we are told to fear God in a number of different ways and places. So that's a second reason. A third reason is just simply the context. Notice this is in the context of persecution, and we'll be talking about that a little more. Brother will deliver brother over to death. You'll be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, so on and so forth. So this is in a context of persecution, and Jesus is saying, don't fear them. And then he goes on to say, why? Because they can only kill the body and cannot kill the soul, and he goes on. But this is the really critical part I want to get to here. Notice what he says. Therefore, everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will acknowledge before my Father, speaking of God the Father, who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. So in context, the one to be feared appears to be the one before whom Jesus will either acknowledge or deny a person, namely his Father, God. So the context here appears to militate against the reading that the one who can destroy body and soul in Gehenna is Satan. It appears very clearly to be God. Fourth reason is because in the parallel in Luke 12:4-5, it's not that what Luke records Jesus saying is not that there's one who has the ability, the verb dunamai, meaning can or have capacity to or whatever, but rather has authority. The Greek noun exousia, meaning authority in this case. So clearly Satan doesn't have authority, some sort of divinely granted authority to met out punishment on God's part or anything like this. No, the one who has the authority, the exousia, to cast into Gehenna is clearly God himself, not Satan. Satan himself, as is clear from elsewhere in Scripture, is himself facing this ultimate destiny. He is not meting it out upon others. So that's another reason. And then finally, and fifthly, notice what Luke says this one has authority to do: to cast into hell. This word cast translates the Greek verb embalo, which is just sort of a compound form of the verb balo, which means to throw or to cast, like you might cast a ball or cast a net or whatever. And we see from a number of places seem to indicate that it's not Satan who will be doing this casting. It will be God himself, indeed, or at least God's agents, God's righteous agents. And as evidence of that, I'll point to Matthew 13, verse 41. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. And in case it's not clear, this word throw is that verb balo, meaning to cast or to throw. So those are what I consider to be 5 reasons which are collectively conclusive in indicating that the one who has the ability to destroy both body and soul in Gehenna is God rather than Satan. And so that you can take a screenshot or pause it or whatever and take notes, here is a summary of the evidence I've presented thus far. And I will try to do this a few times throughout the stream today, but once I get to a certain point, it means there won't be any more, and that's just because I ran out of time. I've been spending almost all of my time between yesterday afternoon and now preparing for this episode, and still was not able to get it all ready to go. But so here you can see the reasons for taking this as God being able to destroy body and soul in hell rather than Satan. And again, I'll let you pause that, take a screenshot, take notes, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to go through this again because I would just be repeating myself. So that's the first preliminary question that I wanted to answer. The one who has the ability in Matthew 10:28 to destroy body and soul, I'm sorry, N.T. Wright, is not Satan. It's God, and very clearly. The second preliminary question that I want to ask about this text is whether there's any reason to think that all Jesus is trying to do is say that God has the ability or capacity to destroy both soul and body in hell, but won't in fact do that. All right, because the text does literally say that the one to be feared is the one who dunamai, is able to, can destroy both soul and body in hell. And so some people argue that that doesn't mean that he will, but that again is something I'm going to argue against. And here is the argument that I want to offer for the argument I want to offer for saying this is in fact what God will do hinges on the Lucan parallel, the parallel in Luke 12:4 and 5. This is Luke's. So remember, when we read the words of Jesus or anybody else in the Gospels, you're not necessarily reading a verbatim record of what Jesus said. You're reading the gospel the biographer's capturing of, rendering of what Jesus said, which could be a paraphrase, could be word for word. There's a number of different ways that might happen while still preserving the gist of what Jesus or whoever else is being recorded said. So Jesus said something, and the thing that he said, Matthew captures as can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna, but Luke captures it as has authority to cast into hell. All right, so these are pretty much synonymous. Whatever it is that Jesus said is equally captured by the phrases "can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna" and "has authority to cast into Gehenna." And what's critical here is that it's very clear that the wicked will, in fact, be cast into Gehenna. So we could look, for example, at Matthew 5, verses 29 and 30. Jesus says, "It's better for you to lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell." Here again is that verb balo, meaning to throw or to cast, and he says the same thing in a parallel way in the next verse. We could also look at Matthew 18, 8 and 9, where Jesus says virtually the same thing. It is better for you to enter life, crippled or lame, than with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And he says the same thing in the next verse in a parallel way. And again, thrown is the verb balo, meaning to throw or to cast. It's not just Matthew either. Mark 9:45. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life or life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into Gehenna. Again, balo, the verb meaning to throw or cast, and he says the same thing in verse 47. So there's a number of these places which really clearly indicate that the lost, the wicked, the unrighteous will indeed be cast into Gehenna. And as we've already seen, Matthew 13 verse 42 is a good example of that. Here, this isn't just a "it's better than this, than that" statement. Here, Jesus is actually saying what will happen. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will throw the wicked into the fiery furnace. And here again, the verb is balo. So the thing that Jesus says, which is equally accurately captured by the phrases "can destroy both body and soul" and has authority to cast into Gehenna, that thing, in the way that Luke captures it, is in fact in a number of places what is indicated to actually be the fate of the wicked, even if those phrases don't include the destruction of body and soul. So that alone, I think, is evidence that clear evidence that that it's not merely that God can, but actually will destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. But I would add to that a couple of things. First of all, remember the context here is one of persecution. These disciples of Jesus are facing the very real threat of being persecuted to death, being killed. He even says it earlier. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children rise against parents and have them put to death, etc. The whole thing here is about the threat of persecution, the worst of which is in fact death. And Jesus is saying, but don't fear them. Don't fear them, because they can only kill the body, but they can't kill the soul. So rather, the one you should fear is the one who can do both. And it wouldn't make any sense to say, yes, you people, I know you're fearing actually being killed, and that really actually might happen. But the one you should fear is the one who can do this other thing. Oh, but don't worry, that'll never actually happen. Right? That doesn't make any sense. He's saying the one threat is to not be feared because of this other worse threat that God can and will do if his threat isn't heeded, if his warning isn't heeded. So that's another reason for concluding that this does not merely say God can, but actually will destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. A third reason is because even if Jesus did want to say, to mention a threat of something that God can do, but actually won't, then any warning, however absurd, would fit the bill. This is a quote from Glenn Peoples's "Why I Am an Annihilationist." If you do a search for Glenn Peoples or Right Reason, that's the name of his blog, and then "Why I Am an Annihilationist," you can pull up a very helpful PDF that was extremely influential for many annihilationists, including myself. And this is what he says. He says, the same purpose, that is, offering a warning of something that won't actually happen, would be served by some absurd warning like, be afraid of the one who can turn you into a melon. The warning would be misguided because God is not going to turn anyone into a melon, but he is going to destroy the lost. So as soon as you try to say this is a threat of something that could but won't happen, it becomes absurd, and you could throw anything in there, and it totally defeats the purpose of the warning. Meanwhile, we know, as we've already looked at, that the lost will in fact be cast into Gehenna, the thing that Luke records Jesus saying this one has the authority to do. And I'll just add here that of one among many texts that indicate that the lost will in fact be destroyed is 2 Thessalonians 1:9. They will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction. And, we could do and have treated this passage in a number of places, so I'm not going to go into detail here. The point is just to say that what Luke records Jesus as saying God has the authority to do is the thing that the Bible multiple times says will happen to the lost, namely they'll be thrown or cast into hell. And what Matthew records Jesus saying God can do, namely destroy other passages, including but not by any stretch of the imagination limited to 2 Thessalonians 1:9, the Bible says will happen to them. So here's a summary of the evidence that I've just presented, indicating, I think, that what Jesus says God can do, he will do. And again, I'm just going to put this up on the screen so you can take a screenshot, take notes, whatever. And this isn't even all the evidence I just presented. It's just the one that I consider to be the line of evidence that I consider to be the strongest. So hopefully that helps. And again, I've got some more slides to summarize what I'll have said along the way, and then I'll warn you when I no longer have any slides, so you'll have to pay even closer attention. All right. So, with those two questions out of the way, number one, is it God or Satan? Clearly it's God. Number two, is it only what God can do, or is it what he will do? Obviously it's what he will do. Now we can turn to the deep dive that I am going to now take along with you viewers into Matthew 10:28, so that we can figure out just what is it that God will do. When Jesus says something that Matthew records as destroy both body and soul in Gehenna, and what Luke summarizes or captures as cast into Gehenna, what does that mean? It's not enough that on the surface of it seems pretty clearly to militate against the traditional view. We've got to actually do the hard legwork of exegesis to find out. And one of the things, of course, that's important to exegeting any passage is to look at it in its context. And so the first segment of this deep dive, if you will, that I want to do is I want to do a bit of a survey through the book of Matthew as it leads up to and shortly after Matthew 10:28, so that we can capture the context in which Jesus finally says these words in Matthew 10:28. So when I say we're going to look at this Matthean context, I don't mean that we're going to go through the text together line by line. That would take us too long. And I also don't mean that we're going to look at the whole book of Matthew. Rather, I want to look at what I think, and you can do this work on your own and see if you find some things that I've missed. But I want to look at the text in the book of Matthew from the beginning leading up to Matthew 10:28 that seem to, let me put it this way. The proper meaning of a text could be thought of as something like a puzzle piece in a jigsaw puzzle. And what looking at the context can do is to help us get an idea of what the shape of that puzzle piece is expected to be, so that we can look at competing differently shaped pieces and see which one fits that context better. So that's what I want to do, is I want to go from the beginning of Matthew, look at the relevant texts that start to shape what that puzzle piece should look like, including a little bit after Matthew 10:28, but not the whole book, because although those things are important, again, it would just take us too long, and I think going a little bit after will be enough to provide us with the shape of that puzzle piece. So what I want to begin with is in Matthew 3, verses 7 to 12. All right, this is our starting point. Again, you may find that there are things said prior to this point in Matthew that are relevant, but I did not. Nothing that was relevant enough, at least, to include in this deep dive. So you're just going to have to bear with me for now, and then if you go and do your own research and find out I've missed some things, let me know. I'd be happy to hear them. But this is our first text. as we're reading through the book of Matthew. And the key here that I want to look at is a couple of things. First of all, notice that, and this is John the Baptist speaking, he says, even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. This is, so far as I can tell, one of the, if not the first, punishment warning in the book of Matthew. And the kind of punishment envisioned here is one that is analogous to throwing a tree, a cut down tree, into a fire. And of course we know what's going to happen to cut down trees in fire. But the other thing that is really important here is that this is our first use of, here in verse 12, of the phrase unquenchable fire, which is used elsewhere in the Gospels, and it is also the equivalent of like their fire is not quenched, which of course features in Mark 9:48. But notice what he says here. This one, namely Jesus, his winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will clear his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn. But the chaff, that is the weeds that have been allowed to grow along with the wheat, the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. And here's what's really important here. This word burn, and this is something I've said numerous times on the show, but for those of you who have seen me do that, just be patient, because there may be people watching right now who don't know this. This word burn, that's actually a poor translation of the original Greek. A better translation, and you do see this in some other translations, is burn up. Because the word that we're dealing with here is the Greek word katakaio. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to pull up. I wanted to pull up this. This is the word katakaio. This doesn't just mean to burn, it means to burn completely down, to burn up, to reduce to ashes. This is the word that if you were to go into the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament completed in the centuries leading up to Christ, and if you were to go to Exodus 3, I think it is, where Moses sees the bush burning, but the bush was not consumed, you'll see there that the translators use the Greek word kaio, which means to burn, to say what it is that the bush is doing. And then they use the word katakaio, burn up, burn down, consume, to say what it is that doesn't happen to the tree. So something can be burning, that would be kaio. But if it's burned until it's reduced to ash, that's katakaio. And here, John the Baptist says that the chaff, this Son of Man, this coming Jesus, will burn up, burn down, reduce to ashes with unquenchable fire. Now notice something, what this tells us about the nature of unquenchable fire. The nature of unquenchable fire is not that it never dies out. It may or may not. That's not something that this text is indicating. The fact that the chaff will be burned up, reduced to ashes, is an indication that unquenchable fire is fire that can't be put out. I've used this analogy all the time. If you're at work and you get a phone call and a fire person tells you, you better run home because your house is on fire and we're trying to put it out, we're trying to quench it. And so you rush home, and you get home, and to your dismay, your house is reduced to nothing but smoldering, smoking rubble. Imagine if the fire person came up to you and said, "Congratulations, we quenched your fire." You would be really upset at them saying that, and you would think they're full of crap, because obviously it failed to quench the fire that your house was burning in. Had they succeeded in quenching it, your house wouldn't have been reduced to ashes. So all of this is just to say that the very first time, as far as I can tell, that we come to a relevant punishment warning, we see that it's a punishment akin to throwing a cut down tree into fire, which would burn it up. We see a punishment that would be akin to throwing weeds into a fire where they are burned up, reduced to ashes. And we see that punishment that is inflicted by unquenchable fire is not one that demands that fire keeps burning, or it will never die out. That's simply not what the expression means. And then, for some reason, I gave myself a note to cross-reference Matthew 7:19. Oh, and that's because we see here another place where Jesus uses this picture of a tree being thrown into a fire as an example of, or as a word picture of punishment. So that's our first step. Matthew 3, 7 to 12 is our first stop along the way in Matthew toward Matthew 10, 28. Let's keep going now, and we'll stop now at Matthew 5, 22. Jesus is saying, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment." That's verse 21. Then in verse 22, he says, "I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'you fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." Now, here again, we have an example of judgment, punishment pictures, and in this case, it's a picture of fire. But more than that, here is where Jesus first uses that infamous word that is so often that is so often translated hell in the Synoptic Gospels, which is Gehenna. This word hell is the word Gehenna. I'll pull that up so you can see it in the lexicon. So this is Gehenna, and as you can see, the lexicon points out that the Greek term Gehenna is derived from a Hebrew phrase meaning Valley of Hinnom, and then it goes on to unpack that a little bit. Now, here's what's important about this. Again, this is the first time Jesus is using the word Gehenna and connects it with fire, and the common claim by defenders of eternal torment is that in the intertestamental period between the conclusion of the Old Testament and Jesus' appearance on the scene, Gehenna becomes a toponym, an eschatological toponym, which is a place whose name is used to evoke a picture of something. And what they claim, traditionalists that is that where this toponym is used in the intertestamental period, it's used in the context of a picture of final punishment that entails eternal torment. Now, I'd encourage you to check out Kim Papaiwano's book, The Geography of Hell and the Teaching of Jesus, I think is what it's called, because he demonstrates, I think, that the evidence is very weak that Gehenna became that kind of toponym between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It appears to be a development that post-dates Jesus. In other words, Jesus appears to be the first one to use Gehenna in this way. Now, what's important about this then, if that's right, or even if it's even somewhat right? In other words, even if all that is needed for this to be true is that it must not yet have become a super popular toponym, it didn't have to be, as long as it hadn't yet become ubiquitous, then what I'm about to say, I think, is fairly reliable. Namely, when Jesus uses the word Gehenna, he's evoking not some eschatological picture in the writings of obscure Jewish authors that few of his hearers know. He's evoking a picture with which all of his hearers would have been intimately familiar. He's evoking a picture that is in the very Old Testament in which they are deeply steeped. In particular, I want us to look at Jeremiah 7, beginning in verse 32. So, actually, I'll go back a little bit earlier. You're going to read here of a place called Topheth. And Topheth was a place where idol worshippers of Molech and Baal, I believe, sacrificed, or at least allegedly sacrificed, their children in fire as worship to their false gods. And so so Yahweh says to Jeremiah, "Behold, the days are coming when it will no longer be called Topheth or the valley of the son of Hinnom," there's Gehenna, "but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth because there's no room elsewhere. And the dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth, and none will frighten them away." All right. So that's just one example. We see a similar picture in Isaiah 66:24, even though the valley of the son of Hinnom isn't explicitly mentioned there. Lots of scholars agree that that is, in fact, a picture of that valley, and there are other places as well. The point is that the Old Testament use of the valley of the son of Hinnom as a picture of eschatological future punishment was a picture of God's enemies being slain and their bodies being burned up or eaten up. That is the picture that Jesus evokes the first time and every time he uses the word Gehenna. He's not evoking some popular picture of future everlasting torment used in a few obscure Jewish authors whose provenance is questionable to begin with. He's evoking a picture that his hearers would have been intimately familiar with from their familiarity with the Old Testament. And I'll just add, and then let me go a few verses later to Matthew 5:29 and 30. Notice what he says. This is one of Jesus's first, it's better to be maimed than to X sayings. Notice what he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And then he says basically the same kind of thing, but with a different body part. Now, here again, we see him using Gehenna. This is what's translated hell here. And nothing is explicitly said about what's going to happen to the whole body when thrown into Gehenna. By the way, here's another example or an example we covered earlier that indicates that people will in fact be cast into hell and their bodies will suffer damage there, right? It's not just what God can do, it's what he will. But the thing that I want to point out here is, although in this saying, Jesus does not explicitly say what will happen to the whole body when thrown into hell, he does, in the very same kind of saying, indicate as much elsewhere. So if we fast forward a little bit to Matthew 18, 8 and 9, he says, look at how similar this is. So Matthew 5:29, if your right eye causes you to sin, and then the next one, if your right hand causes you to sin. Well, in Matthew 18:8, it's if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. And then in the next verse, if your eye causes you to sin. So it's the same concept. If you've got some part of your body that causes you to sin, it would be better for you to rip it out, cut it off, than for your whole body to go into hell. But here's the important thing. Here he gets more explicit. He says, it is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And he says the same thing here. And by the way, eternal fire, we've covered this before. It's the fire that destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, according to Jude 7. It's not about fire that burns forever, but we'll have to cover this in another video. And I have. If you go into the archive of Rethinking Hell Live episodes, you'll see one that is focused on the phrase eternal fire. So I'll encourage you to check that out. But the point here is that in both of these two parallel sayings, Jesus says it's better for you to enter life maimed than for your whole eye to be thrown into Gehenna. So now we have the element, the explicit element needed to fill out what Jesus is saying back here in Matthew 5:29 and 30. He's saying the following: it's better for you to live maimed than die whole. Right? Wouldn't that be the natural way of reading Matthew 18, 8, and 9, and now this passage, since it's so clear he's setting up the same kind of idea? It's better for you to enter life maimed than for what? To not enter life whole, to die. So at this point in Matthew's narrative, here we see Jesus saying that it's better to live maimed than to die in hell whole. That appears anyway to me to be the case. You guys can make up your own minds. We're going to zoom ahead a little bit more now to Matthew chapter 7, specifically verses 13 and 14. Jesus says, "Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many." Now, if it just stopped there, then the ubiquitous traditionalist response might have some legs. It might have some legs to walk on. Namely, that destruction here doesn't mean cessation of existence, which, by the way, isn't what we annihilationists say anyway, but put that aside. So they'll say, look, destruction it could mean ruin, it could be waste or whatever, and the text doesn't tell us what the nature of it is. But it doesn't stop in verse 13. It goes on in verse 14. The narrow gate he'd just gotten done saying, the broad gate, the wide gate, Jesus has just gotten done saying, is the one that leads to destruction. But there's another gate, another way. And that is the narrow gate, the hard way. And what does it lead to? Life. So you see that we know what destruction is not. We know that it is not life. It does not include life. Now, at this point, traditionalists are going to want to say, okay, well, hold on, but life means more than existence. All of us annihilationists have heard that too many times to count. I wish I had $1 for every time I've heard that. And that's fair. But let's look at how words that come from this. So this is the Greek word zoe, and I've covered this in previous episodes of Rethinking Hell Live. It does not mean some sort of special quality of life or anything like that. Those are myths. But what I want to do here is look specifically at how words deriving from the root that this noun comes from are used elsewhere in Matthew. The noun here is zoe. The verb equivalent is zao, and zao is what is considered to be the root of the noun. And there are a few places I want to look at in Matthew that tell us what life is. It's not some sort of special quality of life. So Matthew 4:4, and we've passed this by this point, but notice what it said. What Jesus says. It's written, "Man shall not live by bread alone." Well, what is live? It's zao. It's the verb equivalent of the noun zoe. And it's not saying here, man shall not have a special quality of life by bread alone. He's saying that life itself is not something that is not brought about solely by bread, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Perhaps more clearly is Matthew 9:18. Jesus is talking, and then behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." Here again, the verb is zao, the verb equivalent of the noun zoe, meaning life. And notice again, it's not talking about some sort of special quality of life. It's talking about life, period. You got a dead girl, and this guy thinks that if Jesus touches her, she won't be dead any longer. She'll come back to life. And there's one more example of this, at least, in Matthew 27:63. I focused on the indisputable examples. In other places where the phrase eternal life, for example, is used, there is no clear indication. There's nothing that in the text that's going to settle the debate as to whether it means special quality of life or life qua life. So I'm focusing here on examples where that's really indisputable. And the last example I'll give is Matthew 27:63. This is the chief priests and Pharisees talking to Pilate, and they say, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said, while he was still alive, after 3 days I will rise." Now, think about this for a moment. The Pharisees don't think that Jesus lives some sort of special godly kind of life. They're opposed to him. They think he's godless. They think he's doing his works by the power of Beelzebub. They are denying him. They're rejecting him. And this is after Jesus' death, his ordinary physical death. And they're saying, while he was still alive. And alive translates zao, the verb equivalent of zoe. So in the context of Jesus' use of zoe in Matthew 7:13, which is the antithesis to destruction, life just means life. It doesn't mean a super fancy special kind of godly life where you're close to God in special relationship with him or blah, blah, blah. It's living, period. And the gate that is narrow and the way that is hard is what leads to continuing to live. The gate, however, is wide, and the way, however, is easy, that leads to non-life. That is the antithesis of life, which in this case is destruction. All right, so there we are at Matthew 7:13 and 14. We're going to go a few verses later and take a quick pit stop here, because it's at this place that Jesus says something that traditionalists are very likely to try to press into service. Jesus says here, "I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness." And so the argument is going to go, well, clearly Jesus conceives of final punishment as some sort of separation, right? Because he's saying, depart from me, get away from me. And so some traditionalists are going to say that this is an indication that the nature of the punishment isn't destruction in the sense of cessation and ongoing privation of life, but rather destruction in some vague, inexpressible sense of separation from God. But that's reading a whole lot into this phrase, depart from me. If you imagine our country's legal system didn't have people that have been sentenced to death waiting in prison for a death penalty day for an execution, during which time they can do all sorts of appeals and things like this. Imagine if you get sentenced to death, you're immediately marched out to the gallows and hung. And imagine the judge, he's heard all the evidence, the jury has read their verdict and found the defendant guilty, and so the judge pounds his gavel and says, I sentence you to death. Depart from me. Get out of here. And then the criminal is marched out to the gallows in the town square and hung. By saying get out of my face or depart from me or get out of my courtroom, is the judge declaring that the nature of the punishment he's inflicting, that he's meting out, is separation? No. It's just get out of my presence and go to where your punishment is going to be meted out, which in this case is the gallows, and the punishment is death. So the fact that Jesus says he's going to say, depart from me, does not in any way indicate that the punishment is separation. It just means that the punishment, at most, it means that the punishment follows being separated from, or entails being separated from Jesus and God. But it does not mean that that it's synonymous, that the nature of the punishment is in fact separation. So this pit stop along our way does not help us to, or does not help anyone to challenge our conclusions that we've come to so far. So let's move a little bit further in our text in Matthew to Matthew chapter 8, verses 11 and 12. Here again, traditionalists are going to press the text into service, and here they have a little bit stronger of an argument, at least at first glance, than the previous one, because depart from me does not in any way indicate that the nature of the punishment is separation. Excuse me. But here we do see that the punishment entails at least some period of time of conscious experience. Because look what Jesus says, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. By the way, in case you're curious, this caught me at first. I was like, why does it say recline at table? That doesn't even make sense. Well, it's because this whole phrase, recline at table, in fact, this whole phrase, recline at table, translates a single Greek verb that means to recline at a table, the kind of reclining the Jews did while they were celebrating Passover, for example, or whatever. So just in case you're curious why it's not using the word the. They might as well just said recline with, but anyway. And then he goes on to say, the sons of the kingdom, however, will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So you can see here that the text does seem to indicate that in the place into which the wicked are thrown, there will be some conscious experience, and it sounds a lot at first glance like it's pain. So a traditionalist is going to say, see, clearly the punishment is its nature is some sort of conscious experience. But again, this is to read into the text more than is actually there. Let us say, for the sake of argument, that weeping and gnashing of teeth is indeed an expression of great pain. It wouldn't follow that that is the nature of the punishment, or that it would go on forever. People who are burned to death are going to express a great deal of pain in crying and screaming out and so forth. But their punishment is not the pain that's experienced while being burned to death. It's the resulting lifelessness. And this text doesn't say anything about this weeping and gnashing going on forever, or being the nature of the punishment. All it says is, in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the traditionalist argument from this text has nothing going for it at all to begin with. But there's more we can say about this text that is worth looking at. First of all, this phrase outer darkness, you may have heard, and in fact if you're a traditionalist you may have actually done this. I think I probably did before I became a conditionalist. You may have heard traditionalists say that the Bible speaks of hell as both fire and darkness. Which can't actually coexist, right? Fire produces light. And so it is argued these must all be metaphors that are somehow communicating some underlying concept that is akin to fire and is akin to darkness or something like that. But notice that is assuming that phrases like outer darkness are in fact descriptions of hell. But that's not what's going on here. I know it looks at first glance like it's saying that the wicked will in fact be thrown into something called outer darkness, but that's not what's going on. If you look at the other place, or one of the other places where Jesus uses this language, it's Matthew 22:13. And notice, so that verse says, the king said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot and cast him into the darkness. And he also mentions the weeping and gnashing of teeth in that place again. So we're dealing with the same concept, but scroll up a little bit and look what's going on here. Jesus is giving a parable. It's a parable featuring a king who gives a wedding feast for his son and then invites people to it. And when we get down to verse 10, look what we see. The wedding hall was filled with guests. So the scene, and then it says when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there, okay, so this is now inside of a brightly lit festive wedding hall, inside the scene in which this parable is set. So what is the outer darkness? It's not some description of hell or label for hell or anything like that. It just means the darkness outside. The darkness outside the wedding hall, which is brightly lit and festive because there's a banquet going on, a wedding banquet, which would have happened in the evening and it would be dark outside. You don't have street lights and city lights and all things like that and satellites. You just have the dark Judean wilderness with a starry night sky above. It would have been virtually pitch black. That is the darkness outside. It's the darkness outside the wedding hall. And I'm not coming up with this on my own. Here is the commentary on Matthew in the New International Greek Testament Commentary series by John Noland. And look what he says. The darkness outside the building which has the banquet hall fits the imagery better than the farthest darkness. That's another way some people have interpreted this. We are to think of an evening banquet well lit inside but surrounded by darkness outside. And it's not only John Noland who says as much, it's also Ulrich Luz in his Hermeneia commentary on Matthew 8-20. Outer expresses figuratively the exclusion from the banquet hall. So the picture here, so this isn't calling hell outer darkness. It's not saying that something about hell is akin to darkness. All that it's saying here is that somebody's thrown from inside a brightly lit festive banquet hall where they don't belong into the darkness outside. That's it. But we can there is no purchase here. I need to get back to Matthew 8:11 and 12. There is no ground here for a traditionalist reading. That doesn't mean it's incompatible with a traditionalist reading, but it does mean you can't argue for a traditionalist reading from either the fact that there will be weeping and gnashing there, or there will be outer darkness there, or that they're thrown out of the outer darkness. The picture here, and this is where Kim Papaiwano's book, The Geography of Hell in the Teaching of Jesus, will help you some more. This weeping and gnashing, this is the expression of people who are realizing they're being excluded from the kingdom. And whether that's going on forever is not something this text explicitly answers. And it's in the scene, it's in the parabolic scene where people are in a brightly lit wedding hall and some are thrown out into the darkness outside. Outer darkness is not a name for hell. But there's still more I want to say about this text, because what commentaries will note is that this picture of a banquet hall is used in even the Old Testament as a picture of Israel's eschatological future. So here, for example, is Isaiah 25. And the thing I want to point out is verses 6-8. On this mountain, Yahweh of armies, that's literally what Lord of hosts means. On this mountain, Yahweh of armies will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine well refined. And notice, by the way, this is all peoples. Literally, whoops, I didn't mean to click that. Sorry. I don't like certain features of the new Logos. I'm going to have to turn them off. All peoples. The word here is which just means peoples, but later down here it's over all nations. And nation translates the Hebrew word goy. Plural, it's goyim. And if you have ever heard Jewish people refer to Gentiles, often they'll refer to them as the goyim. That's what Gentiles are. They're the nations, the Gentiles, the non-Jews. So what we see here is already in Israel's own literature, its own sacred literature, that is the Hebrew Tanakh, the Old Testament, their Torah. we see a eschatological picture of a banquet to which not just Israel, but the whole world, everybody that is a follower of Yahweh, will be welcomed. So you see how natural this is, how well this fits as the backdrop, or you see why Jesus would use and build upon this picture of a banquet to which all Gentiles are welcome, as in the way that he does, where he talks about people will come from east and west, but some people will see themselves kicked out. But the text goes on to say that Yahweh will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. Now, so here what we see is that the banquet that Jesus trades upon when he talks about outer darkness and weeping and gnashing of teeth outside of the out in the darkness outside, etc. That banquet is one in which God is swallowing up death. He's achieving immortality for his people. The question then becomes, when it says that that death will be swallowed up, this covering over all peoples and over all nations, what does that mean? Does it mean that he will immortalize all humankind? That would be consistent with both universalism and the doctrine of eternal torment. But the answer is no. That's not what's in mind here. Because if we just go a few verses later into Isaiah 26, we see in 26:19, Isaiah told that his dead will live, their bodies will rise. Okay, so we see that Israelites, or at the very least Yahweh's people, are going to rise. This is in anticipation of that immortality that we just saw in the previous chapter, Isaiah 25. But in verse 14, the oppressors of Israel will not live, will not arise, to the end that you have visited them with destruction. So this eschatological banquet scene that Jesus trades on in Matthew 8, 11, and 12 is one in which God immortalizes his people, but those who are not ultimately die. And in a previous video, I think it was called What the Bible Really Says About Dual Resurrection. I talk about why this language of not living and not rising is no challenge to dual resurrection, the idea that the wicked will be resurrected. So you can check that out on your own. So that's Isaiah 25 and 26, but I'll add Isaiah 65, 13 to 15. Here again, we see a banquet scene, and this is later in Isaiah. Some scholars of Isaiah think that the passage we just looked at was actually written later than the one we're looking at now. That's not my view. It's not all that relevant anyway. The point is that Isaiah 25 and 26 has this banquet that Jesus is adapting, as does Isaiah 65. And notice what it says. My servants will rejoice, but you, the wicked, shall be put to shame. My servants will sing for gladness, but you shall cry and wail. Right? This sounds a lot like the scene outside the wedding hall in Matthew 8 and 11 and 12. You shall leave your name to my chosen for a curse, and Yahweh Elohim, that is Lord God, will put you to death. So when Jesus adapts this eschatological banquet scene in Matthew 8, 11, and 12, he's talking about immortality, or he's including immortality for God's people, but not for the lost. Their fate is instead death. And I'll add one more thing, just for completeness sake. We see this language of gnashing teeth in Psalm 37:12. Rethinking Hell's own Mark Corbett, I believe, did a whole blog article at Rethinking Hell on Psalm 37. I'd encourage you to check it out. I know Peter has been posting links in the chat, so maybe he can pull it up. But so Psalm 37 is a treasure trove of conditionalist evidence. But the thing I want to look at here is verses 12 and 13. The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he sees that his day is coming. What's going to happen on the day that the wicked receive their comeuppance? The wicked draw the sword and bend their bows to bring down the poor and needy, to slay those whose way is upright. Their sword shall enter their own heart. So these ones gnashing angrily at God, know the reason they're gnashing is because they know their day is coming, the day of their demise. And then lastly, I'll pull up Psalm 112:10, where we see, likewise, the wicked man sees it and is angry. He gnashes his teeth and melts away. Gnashing of teeth does not in any way indicate that the nature of final punishment is pain, or that the weeping and gnashing is going to go on forever. All of this is consistent, most consistent with this Old Testament picture of a final eschatological banquet wherein God's people are immortalized and the lost are destroyed. So let's return to Matthew and our walk through the book of Matthew, and we're going to go to Matthew chapter 8, which is what we were already in, but we're going to go forward to verse 29. Here again, we're going to happen upon a passage that traditionalists often think is an indication that the nature of hell, the nature of the punishment doled out there, is torment. And that's because we're looking here at a text in which Jesus heals two demoniacs, two people that are inhabited by demons or unclean spirits or whatever. And notice what they say to Jesus. What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? So notice why this would so naturally be picked up by a traditionalist and run with. It seems to indicate, number one, that there's a time the demons have in mind in the future, some sort of a set, like a schedule, right? Like a date on the calendar that they know is coming. And secondly, the thing that's going to happen to them on that date is torment. You could see why that would so naturally lend itself to the doctrine of eternal torment. And it's not just Matthew that records this scene either. We can also see it in Mark 5:7-8 and in Luke 8:28-29. But before we turn to those, because that's going to help us to understand what's going on here, the thing I want to point out is that nothing here rules out the final annihilation or destruction of demons. I mean, if we just look at it on the surface, all it says is the demons expect there to be a time at which they anticipate being tormented, and they're wondering if that time has, or if Jesus has come to do that before that time. But does that mean that the fundamental nature of their punishment is torment, or that their punishment must be ongoing, everlasting torment? No. It could be annihilation for them too, one experienced painfully, a process of annihilating that is experienced as torment. That's possible. It could also be that the demons anticipate a time of everlasting torment, but that would say nothing about whether or not human beings can anticipate likewise. So this text by itself does not actually get the doctrine of eternal torment anywhere. It just sounds, it's one of those, Glenn Peoples has written about this. He talks about how you'll see traditionalists even like mix up verses. They'll be talking about Matthew 25:41 and say, Jesus says to them, "Depart from me into the lake of fire prepared for the devils and the angels." Well, notice what they've done there when they do something like that. They've conflated Matthew 25 with Revelation 20, because it's natural and common. Anytime you see fire, punishment, and torment together, you think, oh gosh, there it is. That's that picture of hell I envision. But none of that's actually here. So in and of itself, this doesn't actually get the doctrine of eternal torment anywhere. But I want to say more about this. I want to say that the evidence is actually that they're not even talking about eschatological final punishment to begin with. The reason I want to offer for thinking that is because if we look at the parallels in Mark and Luke, we see that the torment that they are worried is going to happen to them isn't actually a torment associated with some sort of final punishment or whatever. If you look at Mark 5, for example, they cry out from the demoniac with a loud voice, saying, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, O Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, I plead with you, by God, do not torment me." And Luke will go on to say the same thing. We'll take a look at that in a second. But look at verse 10. The demons inside of this demoniac begs Jesus earnestly not to send them out of the country. And then they go again in verse 12, beg him, send us into the pigs, let us enter into them. So what they're worried about is not evidently some torment having to do with eschatological final punishment, but a torment that has to do with being cast out of the people or person that they are in. We see this as well in Luke's account. All right, so they cry out, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." And then look what it says. Gar, that's the Greek there's a word I can't remember, but anyway, it's a Greek word meaning therefore, or what I'm about to say is the reason for what you just read. So the reason they say, "Don't torment me," is because Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. All right, so here again, we see some indication. And look, it goes on. Luke records that they beg him not to command them to depart into the abyss. All right, so you put Mark and Luke together with Matthew, and what you see, evidently, is that they're pleading desperately not to be tormented by being cast out of the people they're inhabiting into the abyss. We'll look more at that in a moment. Look at Matthew 12. Whoops, where am I? Look at Matthew 12:43. This is skipping ahead in Matthew for a moment to look at something that might tell us what's going on here. Jesus says, "When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest, but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which it came, and it comes back, finds, and then it and many other people come back into it." So while the unclean spirit is not inhabiting a demoniac, it's restless, which is another way of saying it's being emotionally, psychologically, whatever, tormented. So that seems to support what we're seeing in Mark and Luke. The fear that they're having of torment is of being cast out of people. That's where they want to be. And they know that as soon as they've been cast out, they'll be restless. They'll experience torment. And as far as the abyss goes, the abyss actually is not final punishment. Look at Revelation 20. John sees an angel coming down from heaven, holding his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. Now, why do I bring this up? Because this word pit is the word abyss. So in terms of demons that inhabit people, the pit is akin to the intermediate state for human beings. It's where they are cast and not allowed to inhabit people, and they're restless there, and they're bound, and they're furious and tormented or whatever. But then one day, at the very least, Satan will be released from that abyss. So this is like a temporary thing. And that is consistent with what we see in Peter and Jude. In 2 Peter 2:4, God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell. That's actually not hell. This is the verb tartarao, which means to cast into Tartarus. Tartarus was, in Greek mythology, a place where semi-divine beings, not humans, but semi-divine beings, were punished in some form of torment, which is why Peter uses the picture of Tartarus as a picture for this intermediate place where fallen angels go. Cast them into hell, tartaraoed them, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. It's intermediate. Same thing in Jude 6. The angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. So you put all of these pieces together. You go back. Let's go back to Matthew 8:29, where the demons ask if Jesus has come to torment them before the time. Yes, evidently they anticipate a date on the calendar at which they're going to experience torment. But when we bring in the parallels in Mark and Luke, when we look at what Jesus says later in Matthew 12 about unclean spirits being restless when they're between hosts, when we pull in the devil being thrown into the abyss for 1,000 years in Revelation 20, when we pull in the intermediate binding of the demons in Peter and Jude, what we see is, they did anticipate a date on the calendar, but that date on the calendar was their being cast into the abyss. It wasn't their final eschatological punishment. So this does not lend any support to the traditional view. So let's keep moving forward, and now we're going to come to Matthew 10:15. Remember, what we're trying to do is walk through Matthew from beginning to shortly after the passage in question so that we can see what the shape of that puzzle piece should be, the shape of the puzzle piece that we're looking for. That is the meaning of Matthew 10:28's destroy body and soul in Gehenna. And notice what Jesus says, I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. So this is where we are introduced by Jesus to the concept of a coming day of judgment. Now, a couple things here. This is an example of a text that does seem to indicate that there will be some degree of difference between what is experienced on the day of final punishment between some people and others. Some people, it will be more bearable for some than for others. And very often traditionalists accuse annihilationists of not being able to account for degrees of punishment, which is, of course, ludicrous. All Jesus says here is it will be more bearable for one person than for another on that day. And I tell you what, it's more bearable for the person being shot by a firing squad than it was for Jesus being crucified. The few moments that it takes to die by firing squad is way more bearable than the excruciating hours it takes to die by crucifixion. And those are just two examples of different ways in which execution is experienced. So there's no problem here, there's no challenge here to annihilationism, but there is a challenge here to the doctrine of eternal torment, because the judgment is something that Jesus conceives of as taking place on the day. A day, not an eternity. Now, if you think I'm making a little bit too much of that day language, I just want to take you to a few other texts. Well, one other text in specific. Matthew 12, beginning in verse 36. So here we've skipped ahead a little bit to another place where Jesus talks about the day of judgment. And notice what he says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Notice, this is like a defendant giving its self-defense. So the picture is like a defendant going up onto the stand and giving an accounting of what he or she has or has not done. Okay, this isn't talking here about the punishment itself. This is talking about giving an account, defending oneself, and in so defending oneself, either succeeding in justifying oneself or failing to do so and thereby condemning oneself. Now think about that. Nobody, not the staunchest of traditionalists, think that the process of judging people will go on for eternity. The process of evaluating whether or not people are guilty. And they certainly don't think that the wicked will literally for all eternity being defending themselves. So this picture of people giving an account of their self-defense really only makes, if it's said to be on the day of judgment, which this text does, really makes the most sense, I would argue the only sense, if this day of judgment is indeed a day of judgment. Not necessarily a 24-hour period of time, but a finite period of time. A relatively short, finite period of time, during which the wicked can offer their self-defense, after which they, we think, will be finally destroyed. And then the text goes on in verses 41 and 42. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. Same thing, the queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. What are we thinking? That the men of Nineveh and the queen of the south, which I think is Bathsheba, are they going to literally be standing on all throughout eternity in this one everlasting day of judgment, condemning other people that are likewise being punished in hell, but to a lesser degree? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. But if this is all happening on a day, then people can attempt to defend themselves and fail, in part because other people join in their accusation. All right, so let's continue our survey, and now we get really close to the text at hand, Matthew 10:28. This is Matthew 10, beginning in verse 16, and again, I want to I don't need to say much here. The point is that in the context of Matthew 10:28, we're talking about the very real threat of being persecuted unto death. They will deliver you over to courts and flog you. You will be dragged before governors and kings. Brother will deliver brother over to death. Father his child. Children against parents will have them put to death. All right. Some of you will endure to the end and be saved. But not everybody. Some will die at the hands of their persecutors. Okay? So this is all, and then finally he says, so have no fear of them, and then one of the reasons that you're not to fear them is because they can only kill the body but cannot kill the soul. So they're facing the very real threat of persecution unto death, and Jesus is saying to them, don't fear that death, because there's a real death, a complete and full death awaiting the wicked that only God can met out. And then we get to, like I said, 28 and 29. There are two more texts I want to look at, though, now, after Matthew 10:28, just to help us finish off the shape of what that puzzle piece looks like at Matthew 10:28, the puzzle piece that gives us an indication of what destroy both body and soul in Gehenna mean. And those texts are, firstly, Matthew 10:38 and 39. Whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Now consider, traditionalists very often argue that apollumy, the word destroy in Matthew 10:28, and the word here, meaning lose, can mean something like to lose. Okay, now what happens, and they'll offer, for example, the lost coin or the lost sheep. And just think about those for a moment. You're the shepherd, and a sheep has become lost. What does that mean? It means you no longer have that sheep. Similarly with a coin, right? If I had a coin but I've lost it, I no longer have that coin. So what does it mean for somebody to lose his life? You no longer have it. You're dead. That's what it means to lose your life. And this is what Jesus is saying here, is that whoever, in the context of facing the real threat of being persecuted unto death, whoever tries to avoid that fate by, whoever saves or finds his life by, say, denying Jesus before men. Well, we just saw what Jesus said earlier. He will deny that person before the Father in heaven. So what does that mean? That person will lose his life. But the one who willingly loses his life for my sake, the one who is willing to be persecuted unto death, will find his life. We'll have it back. We'll live. So here in the context of Matthew 10:28, but now just a little bit past it, what is going on here? The one who is willing to die for one's beliefs will ultimately live. But the one who sacrifices his testimony in order to save his life will ultimately lose it. This is a picture of death. All right, one more text, and then we'll do some summing up. In Matthew 13, beginning in verse 24 and stretching until verse 30, Jesus tells the parable of the wheat and the tares. Remember, we were looking earlier in Matthew 3, and we saw that John the Baptist says that the coming one will burn up chaff in unquenchable fire. Well, that happens here too. So in this parable, a man sows good seed, has the people, the seed sprouts up into wheat, but tares or weeds grow up along with that wheat. And then at the end of the parable, he instructs them, let both grow together until the harvest, that is the wheat and the tares. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned. And this is the Greek word katakaio, meaning to burn up, reduce to ashes, burn down. So the picture that Jesus presents in this parable is one in which weeds are separated out from among the wheat, And the weeds are then thrown in a fire and reduced to ashes. Same picture we saw in Matthew 3. But now let's scroll down just a little bit to where Jesus explains or interprets this parable for his disciples. In fact, that's explicitly what they ask. Explain to us, Jesus, this parable of the weeds of the field. And so Jesus does so. And this is the important part. He says, the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels, just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire. All right? So he's saying that picture that I just told you, that you just saw in your mind's eye when you were picturing the story that I was telling you in the parable, where the owner of the land, the seed sower, instructs his workers to bind the weeds and throw them into a fire to be burned up, reduced to ashes. That picture, just as that picture is in your mind, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers and throw them into the fiery furnace. Here's that separation again. So the picture in the parable is of weeds growing among the wheat, and then they are separated, and the weeds are thrown into fire and burned up. And Jesus says that's a picture of what's going to happen to the ungodly. They're going to be gathered out of his kingdom and thrown into a fiery furnace, where they will be burned up. That's what fiery furnaces do. In fact, check this out. This is interesting to me. The Greek here in Matthew 13:42 for fiery furnace is habrugmas ton adanton. All right, this is the fiery furnace. And what I want to show you is Daniel 3:6. Now, before I show you the Greek, take a look at Daniel 3:6 in the Masoretic text, in the version of the Old Testament you have in your Bible. This is the scene in which Nebuchadnezzar has a golden statue of himself erected and says that everybody must bow down and worship that statue. And if they don't, look at what the king says in verse 6. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And sure enough, if we keep reading, we see that they are indeed prepared to be cast into the fiery furnace. And then look. This is the interesting part. He ordered the furnace heated seven times more hotter, 7 times hotter than it usually was heated. And the people of the mighty men of his army who drag Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the fiery furnace to cast them in, they were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments. And the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. But look at this. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took them there. So you see what a fiery furnace does and is intended to do. It's intended to kill people. And in this case, the furnace was so hot that people who just got close to it were killed. All right. Now, why do I bring this up? Because in Daniel 3:6 in the Septuagint, fiery furnace is where'd it go? Sorry, 1 second. I thought it was the same. What did I say it was in Matthew 13:42? Habrugmas ton adanton. No, sorry, I was looking at the wrong text. I'm a moron. Sorry, the fiery furnace is earlier in 42. Kaminan tu puras, tain kaminan tu puras. That is fiery furnace. And look what it is in the Septuagint. Tain kaminan tu puras. It's identical. Right? So when Jesus talks about this fiery furnace, when he's interpreting the parable, he's now telling his listeners to think about Daniel and the fiery furnace Nebuchadnezzar had erected. That is the fate he's talking about, the fate of being thrown in and burned up. Now, granted, Shadrach, I can never pronounce these. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't ultimately die in that fiery furnace. But why? I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of God's. a son of the gods. You see, the reason Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survive being thrown into a furnace of fire is because God protects them. And that protection is salvific. It's not damnific. It's not condemnatory. He doesn't keep them alive in the fire so they can suffer it forever. He keeps them alive to save them. So what would the point of the fiery furnace be for those cast into it who aren't saved? Death. And then lastly, I'll just point out that in Malachi 4, the text says, "Behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven." This is that Greek word in Septuagint. If we go to, it already took me there. Behold, a day comes burning as an oven. That is right. Is it this one? Well, anyway, if you look it up in the Greek here, and the reason I'm getting a little confused is because the verse numbers in the Septuagint don't match the verse numbers in our English text. But you'll find if you look in here that word oven does indeed translate. Oh, in fact, here, I'll show you in this version of the Septuagint, this translation of it. Here's Malachi 4. And you can't see it, but when I mouse over furnace, it translates that same Greek word. So the point is that this burning like an oven day is going to treat the arrogant and all evildoers like stubble. They'll be set ablaze. They will be left neither root nor branch, and you shall tread down the wicked, for they will be ashes under the soles of your feet. This is all of the things that are going on together in this passage in Matthew 13. With the fiery furnace stuff. It's interpreting a parable where weeds are burned up in fire. It's saying that's what's going to happen to the people that are thrown into a fiery furnace, which itself is evoking the picture of the death penalty by fiery furnace in Daniel 3, and it's evoking the furnace language of Malachi 4, in which the wicked are reduced to ashes. Okay? So, here's what I want to do now. I want to summarize the evidence I've presented as I've walked through the book of Matthew from the beginning to shortly after, Matthew 10:28, and summarize the evidence that helps us to see what the shape of this puzzle piece is. Number 1, God's wrath will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. Number 2, in Gehenna, that's where that will happen in Gehenna, which God promises will be where his enemies are slain. Number 3, maiming oneself and living is better than losing out on life altogether. Number 4, destruction is the eschatological alternative to life as ordinarily understood. Number 5, the dark outside the banquet is death. Number 6, there's a coming day of judgment, not eternity of judgment. 7, saving one's life by denying Christ results ultimately in losing one's life. Number 8, that losing one's life is like being burned up in fire as if weeds. Number 9, the wicked are thrown into a fiery furnace which kills those lacking God's salvific help. And number 10, this furnace will reduce the unrighteous to ashes beneath the feet of the righteous. Put an asterisk next to that last one because I'm beginning to doubt myself as to whether it is indeed the same Greek word. In fact, I'm going to look it up here just before I go to my next slide. Because I don't want to. So the noun is kamenos, and in the Septuagint it's klebenos. Okay, so it may not actually be, it may not be the same word. I might have gotten that mistaken. So put an asterisk next to that last one, although I would argue that the concept is still relevantly similar. So what does this tell us about the shape of the puzzle piece? Just based on what we've gone through, what shape puzzle piece should we expect to fit the gap in terms of what it means to destroy both body and soul? Well, here's what I would say. The Matthean context of Matthew 10:28 therefore makes clear that one is to confess Christ before others despite the real threat of death, because while others can kill one's body but cannot kill one's soul or life, God is the one, and I'll talk about life in a second, God is the one who can and will both slay one's body and end one's life altogether in hell. that is the puzzle piece that we would expect based on the survey that we've just, the walking that we've just done through the book of Matthew. That is a puzzle piece that is shaped like annihilation and is shaped nothing like eternal torment. So that's a contextual argument for an annihilationist reading. But now I want to turn to some other evidence, not in the form of context, but in the shape of language. I want to look at let's go back to Matthew 10:28, and I want to talk about the text itself, not the context, but the text and what the words mean elsewhere, things like that. And the first thing I want to do is acknowledge, just in case there are any traditionalists who think I'm going to hide this from you, hopefully none would think that lowly of me, but just in case anybody is worried that I'm going to hide from you some counter evidence, some evidence that would arguably be in favor of eternal torment, I want to look at a text that reads extremely similar in a somewhat contemporaneous piece of literature, namely 4th Maccabees. So in 4th Maccabees, we see something remarkably similar to what we just read in Matthew 10:28. In this scene, some Jewish brothers are being tortured and and they're told, we'll let you escape, we'll free you if you give up, if you violate your religious principles. And in the face of that, look what they say to each other. Let us not fear him who thinks he is killing us, for great is the struggle of the soul and the danger of eternal torment lying before those who transgress the commandment of God. Now notice just how strikingly parallel this is, or how strikingly similar this is to Matthew 10:28. They're saying, don't fear the one who can kill. And then they say, because there's this struggle of the soul and a danger of eternal torment. Right? It's very similar. Obviously different language, but the concept is extremely similar, and what these Jews are saying is a danger is indeed eternal torment. The Greek adjective is ionios, and the noun is basanos, meaning torment. It's the same word, the same root from which we get basanizo, meaning to torment. So the traditionalist is going to reasonably say, shouldn't we consider this to be something that should inform our understanding of Matthew 10:28? In other words, despite all of that contextual evidence you just presented, Chris, doesn't this contemporaneous literature give us a better indication of how Jesus' words would have been understood? Well, I'm going to argue that no, it doesn't. And there are a few reasons for this. Firstly, if you do any research into 4th Maccabees, you're going to find out that it was not written until it's almost certain that it was not written until after Jesus. This is the Lexham Bible Dictionary. Is that right? Lexham Bible Dictionary, yeah. And under date and provenance, it says 4th Maccabees is most easily dated out of all of the Maccabean literature. And what they ultimately conclude is that it must have been composed around the middle of the 1st century, after after the beginning of a particular administrative reign, and before the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. So we've got a range that so at the very earliest, it was written in 19 AD. Jesus is here talking 10 years later. Even if this work was written at the beginning of this time period, 10 years before Jesus wrote it, the chances that it would have been widely enough distributed and seen as and become popular by this time is extremely unlikely. But even then, it's extremely unlikely to have preceded Jesus speaking those words. It is more likely to have post-dated Jesus' words. And then secondly, somewhere in here, I meant to highlight it, but I forgot. Oh yeah, so this is distinctively the product of Hellenized Jews, and this is important because a lot of times we tend to think of the Jewish people in the time of Christ as being extremely monolithic. as if they all just agreed with each other on virtually everything or something like that. But nothing could be further from the truth. The strain of Jewish thought that is reflected in the book of 4th Maccabees, importantly, is only one among many strains of thought. And what I want to point out at this point is that there were other strains of thought that did not include eternal torment. And so, for example, I want to look at what's called the Tosefta. This is a record of rabbinic tradition compiled after the time of Christ, but nevertheless widely agreed to reflect Jewish beliefs, rabbinic beliefs that stretch back further than that. And notice what we read in, this is a tractate Sanhedrin in the Tosefta. It says, the Israelites who sinned with their bodies and Gentiles who sinned with their bodies go down to Gehenna and are judged there for 12 months. Oh, sorry, let me increase the font size for you. And after 12 months, their souls perish. Their bodies are burned, Gehenna absorbs them, and they are turned into dirt. Now notice something here. This is annihilation. In fact, look what they did. They appealed to Malachi 3:21. Malachi 3:21, according to the Septuagint, that would be for Malachi 4 in our Bibles. They appeal to that, and they say that this group of people are going to be annihilated in body and soul. Their souls perish. That would probably, if it were in Greek rather than Aramaic, well, maybe they were writing in Greek. I don't have the original language they're writing here. But perish is probably going to be the middle voice of apollomy, and apollomy in the active voice is what's used in Matthew 10:28. And their bodies are burned. Right? So we have what by all accounts appears to be a destruction of body and soul. And what do they think that means? They think it means annihilation. So this language seems closer to the language Jesus uses and is the language of closer than the language in 4th Maccabees. And it's about annihilation, not eternal torment. But here's the thing. In the very next part of the tractate, there's a different group of people mentioned. So they just mentioned Israelites who sinned with their bodies and Gentiles who sinned with their bodies, whatever that means. But then they go on to talk about heretics, apostates, traitors, and others. Gehenna is locked behind them, and they are judged therein for all generations. Sheol will waste away, but they will not waste away. So this is something for you scholars, budding scholars in intertestamental or rabbinic literature. This might be something you'd want to explore further. But at least on the surface of it, this seems like the rabbinic tradition recognizes two fates that are both final punishment. One for Israelites and Gentiles who sinned with their bodies, the other for these even more extreme people. And the extreme people are the ones who are possibly tormented forever, but these others, they're the ones who experience the destruction of their body and soul, and they're annihilated. So what does that tell us about 4th Maccabees? It tells us that even if this fate that they're talking about, this danger of eternal torment, even if that were a popular way of thinking in Jesus's day, and it may have been, but even if it was, at most we can say that's one strain of thought in the Jewish tradition, and at most we can, and that even in one strain of the Jewish tradition, it may be that this was only the fate for some, like those who would try to get these Jewish brothers to violate their religious convictions. So even if we pull 4th Maccabees in here, what we as a way of understanding Matthew 10:28, we would all indications are that 4th Maccabees cannot tell us what destroy both soul and body in hell means. It's at the very least equally likely, if not far more likely, that the rabbinic tradition of souls perishing and bodies being burned up in Gehenna, annihilation, is what it means for God to destroy both body and soul in hell, because the language is far more similar than what we see in Maccabees. Yes, the first half is similar to what we see in 4th Maccabees, but not the second half. The second half is far more similar to what we read in that rabbinic tradition. So going back to our my slides meant to summarize points thus far, you can tell the traditionalist who brings up 4th Maccabees 13, 14, and 15 that it just is not decisive. It was written after Jesus said what he did, at least extremely likely that it was. It was an expression of one Jewish subculture among several, namely very Hellenized Judaism, and some Jews who believed in eternal torment for some believed in annihilation for others. And it could be that 4th Maccabees is reflecting only one of those two fates, while the language from the Tosefta is much closer to the language Jesus uses, and therefore we can say that destroy both body and soul in Gehenna means annihilate. It means to destroy both body and soul, not to cause to undergo some sort of eternal torment. All right, next thing I want to look at now is how the book of Matthew records what the word translated soul here tends to mean in Matthew. This is not, I want to be clear, an attempt to argue against dualism. I'm not here arguing that human beings don't have immaterial souls that continue to exist consciously between death and resurrection. That's not what I want to do. But what I do want to do is to take a look at how the way the word soul is used elsewhere in Matthew, as insofar as it might help inform our understanding of what Jesus means here. So the word here is the Greek word psyche. It's the Greek word from which we get the English word psyche, psychology, psychiatrics, etc. And if we look at how it's used in Matthew, the predominant use of it is to mean life. And so an angel tells Joseph, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. Life is psyche. People weren't seeking the child's immaterial soul, they were seeking its life. They wanted to take it. They wanted to kill him. Same thing in Matthew 6:25. Therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, that is, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body. Oh, and I didn't even notice this. So look at this. We've got psyche, meaning life, and body, meaning, and soma, meaning body, which I think are the same two words we have in Matthew 10:28, right? Matthew 10:28, those who, both soul is psyche and body is soma. So same two words. But look how psyche is used. Do not be anxious about your psyche, that is, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your soma, your body, what you will put on. Now, I'm not going to press the fact that the same two words are used further than I ought to. I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to say is that here, the contrast between body and psyche, between soma and psyche, between body and soul, is one in which psyche, meaning sometimes thought to mean soul, is life. Not some sort of special quality of life or anything, but life, period, being alive. So you're not to be anxious about your psyche, not your soul, but your life. Shortly after Matthew 10:28, we already looked at this text, Matthew 10:39, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Guess what life is? It's psyche. Let's take a look at Matthew 16, verses 25 and 26. Whoever would save his psyche will lose it, but whoever loses his psyche for my sake will find it. Now, obviously, this can't mean soul. Nobody loses his soul for Jesus. They lose their life. They're willing to be put to death. So again, and especially in the context of persecution, psyche is life, not soul. And one more we'll look at is Matthew 20:28. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his psyche as a ransom for many. Clearly, he's talking about giving up his life, being killed on the cross in exchange for the many. So, when we look at how the word psyche is used in the context of Matthew, we see it typically means life. And so we have every reason to think that to destroy one's psyche is therefore to end one's life. Okay, but there's still more. Now what I want to do is get a little bit more specific and look at how relevant literature uses the words kill and destroy. All right, especially destroy. So if we go back to Matthew 10:28, the word destroy here is the Greek word apollume. And without going too far into the weeds of Greek grammar, Greek linguists identify different voices: active, passive, middle, and there's a concept of transitivity. So verbs can be transitive or intransitive. I lose, or I stand is intransitive. There's no direct object. But I stand, but I hit the ball. Hit is transitive because there's a direct object, ball. And the important thing here is that destroy, the verb apollumi, is active. Passive would be I was hit by the ball, whereas I hit the ball is active. So destroy here is active, and it's transitive. There's a direct object, and it's personal. The soul and body here are not inanimate parts of something. They refer to the whole person, the whole human being. So I want to look at what it means to destroy people in relevant literature, beginning with Matthew specifically. Matthew 2:13, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain in there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Same Greek word, apollumi, active voice, transitive, personal. And it clearly doesn't mean to ruin, lose, or waste. It means to slay, slaughter, kill, execute, cause to die. Matthew 10:39, we just looked at this a moment ago. This is an interesting one. Here the word loses is apollumi, and I think it makes a lot of sense to translate it loses because the alternative is the word find, heurisco. That's where we get the word heuristics from, by the way. And the natural antithesis of finding would be losing. But if we put that aside and we just look at the fact that it's the same Greek word apollumi, it's in the active voice, it's transitive, right? It's you're doing it to a life. There's a direct object. And in a sense, it's personal in that the life isn't just a life in some generic sense. It's one's own life. It's a person's life. If you think of in those terms, here again, we're talking about death. Right? To lose your life is to die. And again, if you lose your life, you don't have life anymore. That's what it means to lose something. Matthew 12:14, the Pharisees went out and conspired against Jesus how to apollumi him, how to destroy him. Again, active voice, transitive, personal. They weren't trying to ruin or lose or waste the adult Jesus. They were trying to execute him, kill him. Matthew 16:25, whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. We already looked at a similar example to that in Matthew 10:39. Matthew 21:41, he will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him their fruits in their seasons. This was the disciples' answer to Jesus' question. He says at the end of a parable, what do you think that the landowner is going to do to these tenants in this parable? And they say they're going to put those wretches to a miserable death. That's apollumi. Active voice, transitive, personal. And it means kill, execute, slay. Matthew 22:7, the king was angry and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Again, this is a parable. And what it means is by destroying those murderers and burning their city is killing them. And destroy is apollumi, active, transitive, personal. This isn't ruining, losing, or wasting murderers. It's killing them. And then one last one I'll look at as an example is Matthew 27:20. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to destroy Jesus. Apollumi, active voice, transitive, personal. They wanted to kill him. They didn't want to ruin or lose or waste him. So when we look at how destroy is used, active, transitive, personal, in the book of Matthew, we see that it consistently means to kill or to slay. And so to destroy a person in body and soul would be to kill that person in body and soul. Now let's expand the scope of our search and look at elsewhere in the Synoptics. And this is where we're going to bring that passage in, or we're going to bring a similar passage in that we looked at before. The word destroy here in Mark 1:24 is apollumi, It's active, it's transitive, and even though it's not humans, it is personal, right? And angels are persons in the sense that they aren't just inanimate objects, and they aren't just animals either. They're sentient beings that can relate to human beings. So I think it's fair to say that this is being used in the same way. But notice, these are unclean spirits in a demoniac, and they say, "Have you come to destroy us?" And we see the same thing in the parallel in Luke 4:34. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? Now, the reason I want to bring these texts up is because sometimes traditionalists will look at those passages we looked at earlier, where like in Matthew, they say, "Have you come to torment us before the time?" And they'll say, look, the demons expected to be tormented, they expected to be destroyed, those must be synonymous terms. But I want to argue that no, that is not a legitimate conclusion, and there's a few reasons. First of all that stuff we said earlier, the torment in the other passages that we looked at, was evidently about the torment experienced by unclean spirits that are cast out of people and don't get to go into another host because they're cast into the abyss. All right, it's an intermediate prison of something akin to a prison in which fallen angelic beings are held until the final judgment. But secondly, and this is really important, these passages in Luke 4:34 and Mark 1:24, these are not the same account as the other examples that we looked at. So if you scroll just a little bit up to verse 21, look where this is happening. They go into Capernaum, and in a synagogue, there was a man with an unclean spirit. So this is a man with an unclean spirit in the synagogue at Capernaum. And we can see the same thing in Luke 4:34. He went down to Capernaum. He was teaching them on the Sabbath. In the synagogue, there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon. Okay, so these are legitimate parallels. Matthew 1:24 and Luke 4:34 are legitimate parallels. They're Mark's and Luke's respective accounts of what happens when Jesus heals the man that has an unclean spirit in the synagogue at Capernaum. But if we look at the other texts, Matthew 8:29, this is that where the demons say, "O Son of God, have you come here to torment us before the time?" This is when Jesus comes to the other side of what I'm guessing is the Sea of Galilee, to the country of the Gadarenes. And there, 2 demon-possessed men meet him, and they're coming out of tombs. Okay? And this is the same scene in Mark 5. This is 4 chapters after the scene we were looking at before. We see it's the same thing. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, so a slightly different name. But there come out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. All right, so the Gerasenes, or what Matthew called the Gadarenes, demon-possessed men coming out of tombs. Same in Matthew and Mark, and the same in Luke. So they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes. There met him a man from the city who had demons. This doesn't explicitly mention the tombs, but the fact that it's at the Gerasenes, opposite the Sea of Galilee, tells you it's the same thing. So all of this is to say, in Mark 1 and Luke 4, we have the account of the demons in the demoniac at the synagogue at Capernaum who ask if Jesus has come to destroy them. Then we have an account in Matthew 8, Mark 5, and Luke 8 of a different demoniac or demoniacs coming out of the tombs opposite the Sea of Galilee in the country of the Gerasenes. And they evidently ask if Jesus has come to torment them before the time. And I think I might have forgotten to mention that the Mark's and Luke's account do in fact have the demons asking about torment or talking about torment. Okay, but the point is, in the first account, the demons are asking if Jesus come to destroy them. In the second account of a different event, they plead not to be tormented. And we went through what the torment there has to do with. It's not about final punishment. The destroy over here, we have no way of knowing if they're concern about being destroyed is of the same nature as their concern about being tormented. Different demons at a different point in time later, the concern they have about being tormented. We just have no way of knowing. So you can't press the apollemy language in Mark 1:24, have you come to destroy us? We can't press this into service as an indication that destroy and torment are basically synonymous. The demons here may indeed be asking if Jesus has come to kill them, to slay them, to annihilate them even. Whereas later the demons are asking if Jesus is going to torment them before the time they expect to be tormented by being cast into the abyss. Whatever destroy is here, we just don't know for sure. We can't press anything into service. So no, torment and destroy aren't synonyms to demons, contrary to the claims of some traditionalists, because Mark 1 and Luke 4 is the account of Jesus healing the demoniac in the synagogue at Capernaum, whereas Matthew 8, Mark 5, and Luke 8 are the accounts of Jesus healing 2 demoniacs coming out of tombs in the country of the Gadarenes. Torment in the first is not, therefore, a synonym for destroy in the latter, or the other way around. Sorry. And as we already discussed, the expectation of torment appears to be about something like an angelic intermediate state rather than their final judgment. So when we look at how destroy is used elsewhere in the Synoptic Gospels, this account of the demons is no challenge to what we've looked at so far. It very well could be that they feared being killed or slain in whatever it would mean for an angel to be killed or slain, comparable to what it would be for a human to be killed or slain. So let's keep going, and let's go to Mark 3:6. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy Jesus. Apollemy, active, transitive, personal. Mark 8:35. Whoever would save his life will lose it. We already saw this stuff, and the same stuff is happening. Again, this loses his life is apollemy, active, transitive. Same thing in Luke 9:24. Mark 9:22, the unclean spirit often casts the demoniac into fire and into water to destroy him. That's apollemy, active, transitive, personal. It's not about ruin, wasting, or losing. It's about killing. Mark 11:18, the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy Jesus. Apollemy, active, transitive, personal. It's not ruin or waste or lose, it's kill. And that parallel is in Luke 19:47, same thing. Mark 12:9. He will come and destroy the tenants. There's that parabolic ending again. Apollemy, active, transitive, personal. And the parallel in Luke 20:16 also uses destroy in the same way. Luke 6:9, Jesus said to them, I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to harm, to save life or to destroy it? All right, this is clearly to end life, to kill it. And it's apollemy, active, transitive, personal. And then finally, Luke 17:27, 29, and 33. They were eating, this is Jesus talking about the flood. They were eating and drinking and marrying, being given in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Apollemy, active, transitive, personal. What did the flood do? It slew, killed the antediluvians. Same thing when it comes to Lot and Sodom. On the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. Apollemy, active, transitive, personal, killed, didn't ruin, waste, or lose. And then verse 33, whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will keep it. Lose life is to apollemy it, active, transitive, personal. So when we put all of that data together, we see that where active, transitive, and done to humans elsewhere in the Synoptic Gospels in Mark and Luke, to apollemy means to kill or slay. So therefore, to destroy a person is to kill or slay a person. We're still not done though. So I told you this is going to be a deep dive. We're 2 hours in, and there's still more to go. But we are approaching our conclusion. So don't leave if you've stuck around this long. I want to turn now to how the Septuagint uses the language of destruction when referring to people. Remember, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament completed in the years leading up to the time of Christ. And this is where the new evidence that I don't think I've seen leveraged before is really going to come in. Because I really think I've found a wealth of evidence that just further strengthens the case that I've been making so far. Genesis 18. 24 and 25. This is Abram pleading with God not to destroy all the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. If there are 50 righteous in the city, will you destroy them? Apolemy, active, transitive, personal. By no means will you act like this word to kill a righteous person with an ungodly one. Guess what kill is? Kill here is apakteno. Why is that relevant? Because back in Matthew 10:28, kill is apakteno. Destroy is apolemy. So apakteno and apolemy are used in close proximity together in Matthew 10:28. They're also used in close proximity in the Septuagint in Genesis 18:24 and 25. And guess what they both mean? Kill. How about Leviticus 20, verses 3 to 6? I myself will set my face against that man, and I will destroy him from among his people. Destroy is apolemy, active, transitive, personal. And then if we go on, but if the native people of the land have with their own eyes arrogantly overlooked that person when he gave his offspring to a leader, so as not to execute him, and I will set my face against that man and his relatives, I will destroy him. There's apolemy again. And everyone agreeing with him for the purpose of his blah, blah, blah. And any person who seeks out familiar spirits or enchanters, etc., I will set my face against that person and will utterly destroy that person from their people. 3 occurrences here in the span of these 3 verses of the word apolemy, in the active voice, transitively personal to describe what God will do to people. And it's killing them. That's what it means. Everywhere you read about people being cut off from their people in the Old Testament, that's the death penalty. Joshua 11, verse 11. Joshua chapter 11, verse 11. They killed everything that breathed in it by the sword and destroyed everything. Killed is that verb apakteno again, meaning kill. Destroy is that or this word is not the word apolemy, but it is a word that comes from the same root. So this is unfortunately my pop-ups don't show up in my projecting in my screen share, but if I mouse on this, if I right click on destroy, and you can try this if you have Logos Bible software. If you right click on destroy, it tells me this is the Greek verb apolemy, which comes from the root olathros. In the Septuagint, this is a different verb, exalethruo, and it comes from the root olathros. So we can see here that words coming from the root olathros, when referred to human beings, tend to have to do with being killed, synonymous with apakteno. But it goes on, all the spoils of it the children of Israel plundered for themselves, but they destroyed all of them by the edge of the sword, until he destroyed them. Destroy here is that word exalethruo again, but here it's apolemy. Active, transitive, personal. So they destroyed all of them by the edge of the sword until he destroyed them. Now this is interesting because and then it goes on to say they did not leave behind from them even a single one breathing. And then verse 17 also says he captured all their kings, he captured and destroyed and killed. So here you've got another word. Well, this is not apolemy or even from the same root. So ignore that. Just look at the first 2 I mentioned, verses 11 and 14. Killing and destroying go hand in hand here. Apakteno and words from the root olathros mean to wipe out, obliterate by death. That appears to be what's going on here in verse 14. They destroyed exalethruo. They killed all of them by the edge of the sword until he destroyed them, obliterated them, wiped them out. All right? 2 Chronicles 22, verse 10 and 11. Then Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son died, and she arose and completely destroyed all the descendants of the dominion in the house of Judah. Guess what destroyed is? It's apolemy, active, transitive, personal, and it means to kill. In fact, but Jehoshaphat took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him from the midst of the descendants of the king who were being killed. That's thanatao. That's to kill. Thanatao is synonymous with apakteno, to kill. And this is what is happening. This who were being killed is the people who are being completely destroyed. Apollomy. These are synonyms. Esther 9, verses 15 and 16. The Judeans in Susa were assembled on the 4th day, and they killed 300 men, but no one plundered. Killed is apakteno. There's that verb kill again. Then the remainder of the Judeans who were in the kingdom were assembled, and they helped themselves and ceased from their warring activities. I thought that there was somewhere in here. Oh, yeah. And they killed 300 men. That's apakteno. But this, they had killed 15,000? That's apollomy. Active, transitive, personal. So we're heaping example after example where apakteno and either apollomy or something from the same word family as apollomy are used together to talk about obliteration by death. A few more here, actually several more. Daniel 2:24. So when Daniel had gone to Ariakes, the man appointed by the king to kill all the sophists of Babylon, kill is apakteno, he said to him, do not destroy the sophists of Babylon. Guess what destroy is? Apollomy. Active, transitive, personal. So again, apakteno, apollomy, synonyms: obliterate by killing, executing, slaying. This is going from kill to like it's an emphatic elevation, escalation. It's not kill versus something that isn't killing. It's kill versus a really more emphatic way of saying killing. Now let's look at the Maccabean literature. And this is useful because very often traditionalists will say that the Maccabean literature should inform our understanding of eschatology in the New Testament. Okay, well, in 1 Maccabees 2:25, the man from the king who had forced him to sacrifice, he killed at that moment and tore down the altar. Kill is apakteno. And then a little bit later, verse 37, they did not respond to them, nor hurl a single stone against them, nor block their hiding places, saying, we should all of us die in our innocence. That's apathnesko. You are slaughtering us unjustly. Guess what slaughtering is? Apollomy. Present, active, transitive, personal. So apakteno and apollomy used in close proximity to mean they're synonymous, but there's an escalation or elevation. Kill, utterly slay. 1 Maccabees 5:51. He killed every male by the edge of the sword and razed her and took the plunder of the city and passed through the city over the dead. Killed is here apollomy, active, transitive, personal. 1 Maccabees 7:4-6. And so the soldiers killed them. That's apakteno. And then there came to him, blah, blah, blah. Judas and his brothers destroyed all your friends. Guess what destroyed is? Apollomy. Active, transitive, personal. So apakteno, apollomy in close proximity are virtually synonymous. They both mean slay or kill, but it's an elevation, it's an escalation. It's an emphatic way of saying kill or slay. 1 Maccabees 12:48-50. When Jonathan entered into Ptolemais, the people of Ptolemais shut the gates and captured him, and everyone assembled with him. They killed with the sword. That's apakteno. And Trypho sent soldiers and cavalry to Galilee, to the Great Plain, to destroy all those from Jonathan. That is apollomy, active, transitive, personal. And then it's back to and then it's apollomy here for killed too, right? So again, apakteno and apollomy, kill, destroy, synonymous, escalation, emphasis, etc. 1 Maccabees 16:21-22. Running ahead, someone reported to John in Gazara that his father and his brothers had been killed. Apollomy. Now, maybe this is not the best example because that's middle voice. But it is used just a few words within close proximity of apakteno, and they mean the same thing. And then finally, 2 Maccabees is finally in the Maccabean literature. 2 Maccabees 10:22-23. Therefore he slew, that's apakteno, those who become traitors, and immediately overtook the two towers. Succeeding at arms and everything under his command, he killed. Now it's apollomy, active, transitive, personal, more than 20,000 in two fortresses. Again, apakteno and apollomy used in close proximity to mean kill and slay. And then finally, Wisdom of Solomon 18:5. This is the last one I want to bring up in this section. I don't have any more slides, so I'm sorry. This was where I ran out. I had pre-prepared to go through all these texts, but I hadn't had time to put the slide together. But this is the last one in this section on the killing and destroying in the relevant literature. When they had planned to kill apakteno, the children of the holy people, and then it goes on, you destroyed them together in mighty water. Destroy is apolemy. So they had planned to kill the children of holy people. God destroyed them by water. Destroy is apolemy, active, transitive, and personal. So here we've just done a survey. We already looked at the context to determine what the shape of that puzzle piece is. You know, if we're trying to find a puzzle piece that is shaped correctly to fit there to tell us what destroy body and soul means, we saw that the context called for a slaying, killing kind of punishment, and we looked at how soul, the kind of soul that gets destroyed in Matthew 10:28, typically means life in Matthew. Now we've added the places all throughout the Septuagint and intertestamental or many places in the Septuagint and intertestamental literature where kill and slay, apakteno and apolemy, are used in close proximity in the same way they are used here, and they're synonyms with some escalation or emphasis, kill and slay. That just supports what the conclusion we came to about that puzzle piece. But now what I want to do is get even more specific, and this will be the last segment of this before I bid everybody adieu. Here I want to talk about texts where it's not just killing and destroying, it's specifically killing or destroying body or soul. So now you're taking the verbs and you're bringing in the direct objects of those verbs to see what's in mind. So firstly is Luke 6:9. And Jesus said to them, I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to harm, to save life or to destroy it? Now, you might wonder, well, wait, what does this have to do with body and soul? I don't see any of those there. Well, you see destroy, that's apolemy, active, transitive, and personal. What is the it? That's a reference back to life. And guess what life is? Psyche. The alternative to saving life is destroying life, killing it. One more relevant text in the New Testament is Luke 17:32 and 33. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. Same concept here. Loses is apolemy, active, transitive, personal. Life is psyche. And now we're even given the picture of Lot's wife, who was killed by being turned into salt because she wanted to preserve her lifestyle. You know, she looked back in longing toward Sodom. So what does it mean to apolemy, a psyche, in the New Testament? It means to end a life, to lose a life, to kill a life, to destroy life. But now I want to look back at the intertestamental, or the Septuagint again, because here's where I found the evidence that I find incredibly compelling on top of everything we've looked at so far, and that really has me excited. There's a whole host of texts here I want to look at, and the first one I want to look at is a slew of texts in which psyches are said to be apolemied. A slew of them. Genesis, and this first set is all in the context of those people who are cut off from their people, utterly destroyed from their people throughout the Old Testament. So, Genesis 17:14, an uncircumcised male who does not have the flesh of his foreskin circumcised on the 8th day, that soul will be utterly destroyed. Soul is psyche, destroyed is a verb that comes from the same root as alathros, that exalathuo verb. Okay, so this one isn't exactly apolemy, but it's close, and the others, as you'll see, are apolemy. Exodus 12:15, 7 days you will eat unleavened bread, and so from the first day you will remove leaven from your houses. Everyone who eats leaven, that person will be utterly destroyed from Israel. Person is psyche. Utterly destroyed is that exalathuo verb that comes from the same root as apolemy. Exodus 31:14, indeed you will observe the Sabbaths because this is a holy observation. The one who profanes it will certainly be put to death. That is thanatos, and then in a parallel, everyone who performs work in it, that person will be utterly destroyed from among his people. There's that exalathruo verb again that comes from the same root that apolumi does. Leviticus 7, verses 20 and 21. His hands will present the offerings by fire to the Lord. Wait, is this the right one? Oh, yeah. Verse 21, the priest will offer up the fat upon the altar. Wait, no, this isn't right. Maybe it was it? Okay, just ignore this one. I had something here, but I can't seem to find it. So I'm going to skip to the next one. 17:4. Whoever does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of the testimony in order to present it as a whole burnt offering, etc., etc., then blood will be reckoned to that man. He has shed blood. That person will be destroyed utterly from among his people. There's that verb exalathruo again, coming from the same root as apolumi. Oh, and the reason, and that person here again is psyche. Leviticus 18:29. For anyone who may perform any of all these abominations, those persons who do so will be utterly destroyed from among their people. Persons is psyche, destroyed is exalathruo. Leviticus 19:8. Those persons, psyche, who consume it will be utterly destroyed, exalathruo again. Leviticus 26. Any person that's psyche, I will utterly destroy. Now here is apolumi. So any psyche, any soul, any person who does all this stuff, I will utterly destroy. Apolumi, active, transitive, personal, from their people. That's the death penalty. Leviticus 22:3. Throughout your generations, any man who may approach from your offspring up to the holy things, etc., that person, psyche, shall be utterly destroyed. There's exalathruo again. Leviticus 23:29. Any person, psyche, whosoever will not humble himself on this very day will be utterly destroyed. There's exalathruo again. In the next verse, though, look at this. Every person who ever blah, 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 that person, again, psyche, will be destroyed. Apolumi, active, transitive, personal. So now what does this show you? It shows you apolumi and exalathruo are synonyms. So all those other verses we just looked at where they used exalathruo, they could have just as equally used apolumi. It's all the death penalty. Numbers 9:13, a person, psyche, well no, this is anthropos. That person, this is psyche, will be utterly destroyed. There's that exalathruo again. That's talking about the death penalty. Numbers 15:30-31, any person, psyche, blah, 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 that person, psyche, will be utterly destroyed. Exalathruo again. And then it's a totally different word for utterly destroyed here. Another synonym for slaying and killing a person. Numbers 19:20. A man who becomes polluted and is not purified, that person, that psyche, will be utterly destroyed. There's exalathruo again. And then 3 Kings 16:33, which is the same thing as our 1 Kings. 1 Kings 16:33. Ahab made a sacred grove, and Ahab did more to cause anger by provoking his soul, his psyche, to be utterly destroyed. Exalathruo. Again, he aroused the anger of God to cause him to be killed. So here's just a sampling, a slew of texts in which psyches are said to be exalathruo, apolumi, and other synonyms meaning to slay, kill. These utterly destroyed language, the same language used in Matthew 10:28 to describe what God will do to souls, means to slay or kill. Let me look at a few more texts before we begin to wrap up. Psalm 25:9. Do not destroy my soul together with the ungodly, and my life with men of bloodshed. Destroy here is not apolumi, but it's very close. It's sunapolumi, which is a compound. They've taken apolumi and they've put the preposition sun, meaning together, and lopped them together. So you might as well take the together off and just say, do not destroy my soul, and you've got apolumi. And soul is psyche. But what is the parallel to this? What does it mean when he pleads with God not to apolumi my psyche? It means don't destroy my life, my zoe, with men of bloodshed. My just life. This is the pleading of the psalmist not to be swept away in death with the ungodly. Isaiah 38:17-19. You selected my soul, psyche, so that I would not perish, apolemy. Now there we're talking about middle again, but notice it's again about death, because those in Hades will not praise you. Those who die, etc. This is about death, not ruin or waste or anything like that. Now, I seem to recall as I was preparing this list that this verse, Daniel 7:11, was really profound. Daniel writes, "At that time I continued to consider the sound of the arrogant assertions that the horn was uttering, and as I was looking, the beast was viciously killed and its body destroyed, and it was given over to burning by fire." Now, this is what's interesting. The beast is killed. Its body, there's soma, same body that is destroyed in Matthew 10:28, and apolemy destroyed is apolemy. And it's given over by fire to where it's burned up. So here you have a picture of what it means for a body to be apolemied. It means for the body to be either slain and then burned up by fire, or at the very least burned up by fire. So I think that's why I thought that one was interesting. First Maccabees. Now we're going back into the Maccabean literature. First Maccabees 9:2. They went by road to Gilgal and camped at Mesaloth and Arbela, and they captured it. And he destroyed many people's lives. Destroy is apolemy, active, transitive, personal. And guess what many people's lives is? Psyche. So what is it to apolemy a psyche? To kill a person. Second Maccabees 12:26 and 27. Then heading out toward Karnaim and the temple of Atargadas, Judas slew 25,000 people. You can predict it. Slew... Oh, wait. Sorry. It was actually this verse and the next one. So the slew here is a different verb. This is katasfadzo, to murder, slaughter, whatever. He slaughtered 25,000 people. And after the rout and destruction of these, that is, those people that Judas slew, and by the way, people here is soma. So literally, Judas slew bodies. And then it says, after the rout and destruction of these, and destruction is apolleia, the noun equivalent of apolemy. Destroy is apolemy, destruction is apolleia. So for bodies to be slain is for those bodies to face apolleia, destruction. It's for them to be apolemied. It's to kill them. And then finally, Sirach 51:2. Because you became a shelterer and helper for me, and you redeemed my body from destruction. Body is soma, destruction is apolleia again. So you've redeemed my body from destruction. You've saved me, and if you keep reading, you saved me from those who seek my soul, seek my life, psyche. So by saving my body from apolleia means you've prevented me from being killed. This is so utterly clear. It's just all over the place. And then there's one last thing I want to look at, and then I'll go back to full screen my camera, offer some concluding thoughts, and bid you all adieu. And what I want to go back to is once again the Tosefta, because here we have souls and bodies, which in Greek would be psyche and soma. Perish would translate apolemy, and so this is a very, very close kind of language to Matthew 10:28. And as we already looked at, these are annihilated people that go down to Gehenna for 12 months and are judged, after which their souls apolemy, their psyche is apolemy, they die, they perish, their bodies are burned, Gehenna absorbs them, and then they are turned to dirt. The wind blows them and scatters them under the feet of the righteous, and then it quotes Malachi 4. So the rabbinic tradition has this strain of thought in it, in which bodies and souls are destroyed in Gehenna, and that means annihilation. So coming back to Matthew 10:28, I mean, just at first glance, it so obviously works against the traditional view. But when you do a deep dive like the one I've attempted, I don't know how it can be any clearer, people. I feel like R.C. Sproul, who would always say, "What's wrong with you people?" I don't know how anybody could look at this and not have it be so utterly clear. Let me summarize what we've seen. All right. Oh, where is it? All right. This will be my way of summarizing what we've seen, and then I'll bid you adieu. We saw that it's God, not Satan, who has the ability to destroy. We saw that it's not just that God can destroy body and soul in Gehenna, but he will destroy body and soul in Gehenna. We walked through the book of Matthew from the beginning to shortly after, and we saw that in so many different ways, the puzzle piece expected for what destroy body and soul in Matthew 10:28 would be one of death, being judged on a day and having one's body slain and one's life ended altogether. That's clearly the shape of the puzzle piece when you look at all these various things that we looked at when we were looking at going through the book of Matthew. We saw that 4th Maccabees 13, while it does give us an indication that there's a strain in contemporaneous Jewish thought of eternal torment, the language of Maccabees 13, 14 to 15 does not parallel the second half of Matthew 10:28 in a relevant way, but we also looked at the Tosefta to see that the rabbinic tradition also had a strain of thought that was annihilation and that used language nearly identical to Matthew 10:28. Then we looked at how the word psyche, meaning soul, is usually used in Matthew, and it typically means life. So to destroy one's psyche is to end one's life. We saw how destroy, apollemy, is used when active, transitive, and personal in Matthew, and we see that it means to kill or slay. So to destroy a person is to kill or slay a person. We looked at passages which are alleged to indicate that torment and destroy are synonymous because they're on the lips of demons, and we refuted that argument. We saw that what the demons who spoke of torment were expecting was some sort of an intermediate state type torment as a result of being cast out of people and not being able to go into some other creature, and instead being cast into the abyss or tartara'od until the day of judgment, as Peter puts it. We looked at the word apollemy elsewhere in Mark and Luke, where it's used active, transitive, and to describe what is done to people, and it means to kill or slay. So to destroy a person is therefore to kill or slay one. And then I'm back at the beginning. Okay, so we looked at all of that evidence, and then what did we look at beyond that? We looked at how the language of destroying and killing is used in the Septuagint and Maccabean literature, and we saw that over and over again to destroy people, and even to destroy people in the same context as to apoktano people, is to slay them or kill them. And we looked at what it means to kill and destroy bodies and souls in the relevant literature, and then we saw that it means to kill and destroy people, to kill and slay people, to end their lives. How could this be any clearer, my friends, brothers and sisters? What more evidence could you possibly want? What more evidence could you possibly want that this verse that I've got up on the screen means what it says? Every imaginable bit of evidence that we can look at has supported the notion that God not only can but will end the lives of the wicked in hell, destroying both their life and their body. In a way, using language that means to kill or slay them, not to ruin or waste or lose or torment them. There is no way around the implications of this text. And I don't know what more to say. And so I guess I won't say anything more. I hope that has been helpful. In recent episodes of Rethinking Hell Live, and here I'm wrapping up, so you don't worry, I'll end within about 2 or 3 minutes. In previous episodes of Rethinking Hell Live, I've asked for your prayer, and I'm continuing to ask for your prayer because we still have not, Paul Copan and I have not yet heard back from the publisher we've reached out to. Which might sound a little disheartening, but I'm actually heartened by it, because they've had our proposal for something like 2 months now and have not yet... Star says my dinner's cold. I'll be right out there. I have not yet... after 2 months, they have still not yet replied. But each previous time I submitted proposals to big publishers like this, I've gotten word back pretty quickly. So I'm very hopeful that Paul Capan and I will get this proposal accepted. But the reason I bring this up is to say, one of the things that I will be doing in my contribution to this book, and I won't give anything more than that away, if it gets accepted, is I want to exegete. I intend to capture all of this information that we've just gone through and more in an in-depth exegesis of Matthew 10:28. Because up until I announced that I was going to be doing this episode yesterday, I believed that this text was clearly proof of annihilationism. The evidence was already overwhelming, but just look what more there is. It's just so overwhelmingly overwhelming. It's so overwhelming that I really do think Matthew 10:28. So here's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to do something different than I've ever done. People in the past have asked me, what if you had one verse that you could give people to say this is proof of conditional immortality and annihilationism? I've said, gosh, I don't know. I really can't think of one. But I think I can think of one now. Which wasn't an indication that I didn't think there were any clear verses. It's just that I thought there were so many clear verses. But having done the research I've done now that I've just presented to you, I do think that Matthew 10:28 might very well deserve to be that one verse that if we just had one verse to give people, maybe it would be this one. Of course, the challenge is then you've got to also give them all of this other evidence that tells you just what Matthew 10:28 means. But nevertheless, if you apply sound principles of hermeneutics and do the kind of exegesis we've done, the evidence is overwhelming that this verse clearly teaches our view. So, sorry, defenders of eternal torment. I used to be one of you. I know how desperate one can be to cling to the tradition because it's been what so many Christians that I've respected believe and so on and so forth. But sorry, guys, there's just no getting around this verse. So, thank you so much to everybody who has stuck around for what is now 2.5 hours. But as it has been 2.5 hours, I'm going to bid you adieu. Remember, Rethinking Hell Live airs every other week, every other Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, which means that I will see you next in the next episode of Rethinking Hell Live 2 weeks from today, which is Monday, February 1st. At 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, same place that you are watching now, the Rethinking Hell YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you if you have any pushback. Otherwise, I hope this has been helpful, and have a great 2 weeks. I'll see you next time.
Man, look, maybe we should rethink this whole thing. I mean, you heard the guy.
The pains of eternal torment.
Yeah, I gotta rethink this whole thing.